In a distant corner of the galaxy, humanity lived under the shadow of the Zorathian Galactic Empire. The empire ruled with an iron fist, imposing harsh laws and crushing any form of dissent. For years, humans across the colonies endured the oppression, clinging to hope that one day they might be free. But everything changed on a cold, gray morning when the Zorathians committed an act so brutal it shook the very foundation of human resistance. On a small colony world called New Chicago, a group of women had gathered in secret to discuss ways to resist the Empire's growing tyranny. Among them was Emily Carter, a soft-spoken schoolteacher who believed in peaceful protest. She had always taught her students about justice and standing up for what was right, even if it meant taking risks. That day, Emily spoke passionately, urging her fellow colonists to find ways to protect their families from the Empire's cruelty. Unbeknownst to them, their meeting had been discovered by Zorathian spies. The next morning, soldiers descended upon the colony, dragging the women out of their homes. They were accused of plotting rebellion, a crime punishable by death under Zorathian law. Despite their pleas of innocence, the women were taken to the town square, where a grim stage had been set up. Emily stood among them, her heart pounding as she realized what was about to happen. The Empire wanted to send a message, one that would strike fear into every human being under its rule. As the sun rose over New Chicago, thousands of colonists were forced to watch as the women were publicly hanged. Emily's face remained calm, even as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her final words echoed through the square. "We may die today, but our spirit will live forever." The crowd watched in stunned silence, anger simmering beneath their grief. When it was over, the soldiers left, leaving behind a community shattered by loss. News of the execution spread quickly across the galaxy. Recordings of the event were broadcasted on every colony world, ensuring no one could ignore the Empire's brutality. On Mars, John Miller sat alone in his modest home, staring at the screen. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. John had once been a soldier, fighting in the early days of humanity's expansion into space. But after witnessing too much bloodshed, he had retreated to a quiet life as a farmer. Now, seeing Emily's calm defiance and hearing her final words reignited something deep within him, a fire he thought had long burned out. John couldn't shake the image of Emily standing there, brave until the end. He knew her story wasn't unique. Countless others had suffered similar fates under Zorathian rule. Yet this time felt different. This time, it felt personal. As he walked outside to tend to his crops, his mind raced with thoughts of revenge. How could anyone stand by while such atrocities continued? He realized that staying silent made him complicit in the Empire's crimes. Later that evening, John decided to visit the local bar, a place where colonists often gathered to share news and vent frustrations. The room buzzed with tension as people discussed the executions. Some argued for retaliation, while others believed resistance would only bring more suffering. One man, visibly drunk, slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "What can we do? We're nothing compared to them." His words hung heavy in the air, but John stood up, surprising even himself. "We're not nothing," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the noise. "If we don't fight back, then who will? Those women didn't give up, and neither should we." His words resonated with the crowd, sparking murmurs of agreement. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew one thing for certain: humanity could not, and would not, let this stand. John spent the next few days traveling to Earth, the cradle of humanity, though it was now a shadow of its former glory. The planet had been devastated by centuries of war and neglect, its once blue skies now gray with pollution. But despite its decay, Earth remained a symbol of hope for those who resisted the Zorathian Empire. Hidden beneath its ruined cities were pockets of rebellion, groups of humans determined to fight back against their alien oppressors. When John arrived, he sought out Rachel Dawson, a name he had heard whispered in hushed tones among the colonists. Rachel was known as a fierce leader, someone who inspired others to rise up no matter the odds. She operated from an underground base buried deep within the ruins of old Chicago, a place that had become a sanctuary for rebels. John found her in a dimly lit room, surrounded by maps and holographic displays showing the Empire's movements across the galaxy. Rachel looked up as John entered, her sharp eyes sizing him up immediately. "You're the farmer from Mars," she said, her tone calm but firm. "What do you want?" "I want to help," John replied without hesitation. He explained what had driven him here, the execution of Emily Carter, the anger boiling inside him, and the growing sense that humanity needed to unite or face extinction. Rachel listened intently, nodding occasionally but saying little. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied him for a moment. "You're not the first person to come to me with fire in your belly," she said finally. "But I need more than passion. Are you ready to put everything on the line? Because if you join us, there's no turning back." John didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." Rachel nodded, satisfied with his answer. Over the next few hours, she briefed him on the situation. The executions on New Chicago weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic campaign to break humanity's spirit. Across the colonies, women were being targeted, accused of crimes they hadn't committed, and executed publicly to instill fear. The Empire believed that by targeting women, they could weaken families and communities, making resistance impossible. "This isn't just about punishing dissent," Rachel explained. "It's about control. They think if they destroy our hope, we'll give up. But they're wrong." Her voice hardened as she spoke, filled with determination. "We're building something here, something stronger than their fear tactics. We call ourselves the Phoenix Coalition because we believe humanity can rise from the ashes." The coalition was still small, made up of volunteers from all walks of life. Some were soldiers like John, veterans of past conflicts. Others were ordinary people, farmers, teachers, engineers who had lost loved ones to the Empire's cruelty. Together, they trained tirelessly, preparing for the day when they could strike back. Rachel introduced John to some of the key members, including Sarah Bennett, a young engineer who worked on modifying weapons scavenged from old battles. As John settled into the group, he began to see the scale of what they were trying to achieve. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. Every day, more people joined the coalition, drawn by stories of resistance spreading through the colonies. Rachel often reminded them that this wasn't just their fight. It belonged to everyone who dreamed of freedom. One evening, after a long day of planning, John sat alone in a quiet corner of the base, staring at a photo of Emily he had brought with him. He whispered softly, "I won't let your sacrifice be in vain." In that moment, he realized how much had changed since he left Mars. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every person who had suffered under the Empire's rule. The following morning, Rachel called a meeting to discuss their first major operation. The goal was simple: hit a Zorathian supply depot orbiting Jupiter, sending a message that humanity would no longer cower in fear. As plans were laid out, John felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the beginning of a war that would change the galaxy forever. The day of the operation arrived, and the air in the underground base was thick with tension. Everyone moved quickly, checking weapons, reviewing plans, and making sure their equipment was ready. For days, they had prepared for this moment, their first real strike against the Zorathian Empire. The target was a supply depot orbiting Jupiter, a critical hub that provided resources to the Empire's forces across human territories. If they succeeded, it would send a clear message: humanity was no longer afraid. John stood near the launch bay, watching as the makeshift fleet came together. The ships were far from perfect, patched-up civilian vessels retrofitted with scavenged weapons. But they were all the coalition had. Rachel approached him, her expression calm but focused. "You ready?" she asked. John nodded, gripping the strap of his rifle tightly. He glanced at Daniel Carter, Emily's younger brother, who was busy running final checks on his fighter. Daniel had volunteered to lead the aerial assault, his grief over Emily's death fueling his determination. As the ships lifted off, the group traveled in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. Sarah Bennett sat near the back, clutching a tablet filled with data about the depot's defenses. She had spent countless hours studying Zorathian technology, looking for weaknesses. Her voice broke the quiet when she announced, "We're approaching the target zone. Stay sharp." When they reached the depot, the sight was daunting. The massive structure floated in space, surrounded by layers of energy shields and patrolling drones. It seemed impenetrable. But Sarah's research had uncovered something crucial. The shields had a brief cooldown period after being hit by a concentrated blast. If timed correctly, they could disable them long enough to launch an attack. "All right, here's the plan," Rachel said over the comms. "Daniel, you and the pilots will draw their attention. Once the shields drop, we move in fast. Don't give them time to regroup." The pilots acknowledged, and moments later, Daniel's ship darted forward, firing at the drones. The rest of the fighters followed, weaving through enemy fire with skill and precision. The distraction worked. The depot's automated turrets turned their focus to the incoming ships, leaving the shields vulnerable. "Now," Sarah shouted. One of the larger coalition ships fired a concentrated beam at the shields, causing them to flicker and fade. Seizing the opportunity, John and a team of ground troops launched toward the depot in small boarding craft. As they breached the outer hull, alarms blared, and Zorathian soldiers rushed to defend the facility. Inside, chaos erupted. John led his team through narrow corridors, exchanging fire with the enemy. The Zorathians were well-trained and heavily armed, but the coalition fought with desperation, driven by years of pent-up anger. John's mind flashed back to Emily's face as he took down one soldier after another, his movements swift and precise. Behind him, Rachel coordinated the team, her voice steady even as explosions rocked the station. Meanwhile, outside, Daniel continued to evade enemy fire, his ship weaving through the battlefield like a streak of light. He knew the success of the mission depended on keeping the depot's forces distracted. His heart raced as he narrowly avoided a missile, but he didn't falter. Emily's memory kept him going, her voice echoing in his mind. "We may die today, but our spirit will live forever." Back inside, John and his team reached the control room, where they planted explosives to cripple the depot's operations. As they worked, Sarah monitored the shield status remotely, warning them of any threats. "You've got 2 minutes before reinforcements arrive," she said urgently. The team finished just in time, retreating as the charges detonated, sending shockwaves through the station. As they escaped, the coalition fleet regrouped and made their way back to Earth. Though the victory was small, its impact was immense. News of the successful raid spread quickly, inspiring other colonies to rise up. For the first time in years, hope began to take root among humanity. Back at the base, Rachel addressed the group, her voice filled with pride. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The Empire thinks we're weak, but they're wrong. We're stronger than they'll ever know." John looked around at the faces of his comrades, their eyes shining with determination. They had struck a blow against the Empire, and they were ready to strike again. The success of the raid on the Zorathian supply depot brought a surge of hope to the Phoenix Coalition, but it also attracted unwanted attention. General Vortak, the ruthless commander of the Empire's forces in human territories, was furious. He had underestimated the rebels, dismissing them as disorganized and weak. Now he vowed to crush them before they could grow stronger. His spies worked tirelessly to uncover the Coalition's location, and it wasn't long before they found clues leading back to Earth. Inside the underground base, tensions were high. The Coalition knew the Empire would retaliate, but they didn't expect betrayal to come from within their own ranks. Alex Hart, one of the original members of the group, had grown increasingly uneasy. He had joined the resistance out of anger, but as the stakes grew higher, fear began to take hold. Alex convinced himself that humanity couldn't win against the Zorathians. To him, fighting back seemed like throwing lives away for nothing. One night, while the others slept, Alex slipped away from the base and contacted the Empire. He told them everything: the location of the base, their plans, and the identities of key leaders. In exchange, he asked for amnesty and protection. The Zorathians agreed, seeing an opportunity to deal a crippling blow to the rebellion. Days later, as the coalition prepared for another mission, they were ambushed by a squadron of heavily armed Zorathian troops. The attack came without warning, catching many off guard. John woke to the sound of explosions and alarms blaring. He grabbed his rifle and rushed outside, where chaos reigned. Zorathian soldiers poured into the base, firing indiscriminately. People scrambled for cover, some returning fire while others tried to escape. Rachel shouted orders, organizing a defense, but the enemy's numbers were overwhelming. Amid the confusion, John spotted Alex standing near the entrance, guiding the attackers deeper into the base. Realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Alex had betrayed them. "Rachel," John yelled, pointing at Alex. She followed his gaze and saw Alex too, her expression hardening with fury. Without hesitation, she charged toward him, dodging enemy fire. Alex tried to retreat, but Rachel was faster. She tackled him to the ground, pinning him down with her weapon aimed at his head. "Why?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. Alex stammered, trying to justify his actions. "We can't win this war," he said. "They're too strong. I did what I had to do to survive." Rachel hesitated for a moment, torn between anger and pity. But there was no time for debate. The battle raged around them, and every second counted. She knocked Alex unconscious with the butt of her rifle and dragged him to safety, knowing they couldn't leave him behind as a liability. Meanwhile, John led a counterattack, rallying the remaining fighters to push back the invaders. Though outnumbered, the coalition fought fiercely, driven by desperation and betrayal. Eventually, the Zorathians retreated, having inflicted heavy damage, but failing to wipe out the resistance completely. The aftermath was grim. Bodies lay scattered across the base, and many survivors were injured or in shock. Sarah Bennett worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, her hands trembling as she patched up friends and comrades. Daniel Carter sat quietly in a corner, staring blankly at the wall. The ambush had shaken everyone to their core. Later that evening, Rachel confronted Alex in a holding cell. His face was bruised, and his eyes avoided hers. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This fight isn't worth dying for." Rachel's voice was cold as she replied, "It's not about winning or losing. It's about standing up for what's right. You gave up on us, and because of you, good people died today." The incident left the coalition scared but more determined than ever. They buried their dead and tended to their wounded, vowing to honor the fallen by continuing the fight. John addressed the group, his words cutting through the somber mood. "We've been hurt, but we're still here. And as long as we're breathing, we'll keep fighting. For Emily, for Daniel's sister, and for everyone who suffered under the Empire." As the sun rose over the ruins of old Chicago, the survivors gathered to rebuild what had been lost. Betrayal had tested them, but it hadn't broken them. If anything, it had made them stronger. Together, they prepared for the battles ahead, knowing the road would be long and difficult. But they also knew one thing for certain: quitting was not an option. In the days following the ambush, the Phoenix Coalition worked tirelessly to recover. The betrayal by Alex Hart had left deep wounds, but it also forced them to adapt and grow stronger. Sarah Bennett spent most of her time in the makeshift lab, poring over data collected from the raid on the supply depot. She was determined to find a way to even the odds against the Zorathians. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as holographic displays flickered around her, showing schematics of enemy ships and energy shields. One evening, while analyzing a piece of captured Zorathian tech, Sarah noticed something unusual. The Empire's energy shields, though powerful, had a flaw. They required a brief recalibration period after being hit with a specific frequency of energy. If the Coalition could replicate that frequency and target the shields at the right moment, they could disable them long enough to strike. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a chance, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Excited by her discovery, Sarah rushed to share the news with Rachel and John. They were in the strategy room, going over plans for their next operation. When Sarah explained her findings, Rachel's eyes lit up. "This could change everything," she said, leaning forward. John nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. For the first time in days, there was a sense of optimism in the air. The Coalition immediately shifted its focus to implementing Sarah's idea. Engineers worked around the clock to modify their weapons, installing devices capable of emitting the precise energy frequency needed to weaken the shields. Meanwhile, pilots practiced new attack patterns designed to exploit the brief window of vulnerability. Daniel Carter threw himself into the preparations, channeling his grief and anger into honing his skills. Flying became his escape, a way to feel close to Emily again. As the modifications neared completion, Rachel called a meeting to discuss their next target. The group decided to strike at a Zorathian mining station orbiting Saturn. The station was heavily guarded, but it played a crucial role in supplying resources to the Empire's fleet. Taking it out would not only deal a significant blow to the Zorathians, but also test Sarah's discovery in a real battle. Before the mission, Rachel addressed the group, her voice steady and reassuring. "We've been through hell, but we're still standing. This is our chance to show the Empire that we won't back down. Stick to the plan, watch each other's backs, and trust in what we've built together." Her words resonated with everyone, filling them with a renewed sense of purpose. On the day of the operation, the Coalition launched under the cover of darkness. The fleet moved silently through space, avoiding detection until they reached the mining station. As planned, Daniel and the other pilots engaged the enemy ships, drawing their attention away from the station's defenses. Once the shields began to falter, Sarah monitored the timing remotely, guiding the ground team led by John. "Now," she shouted over the comms. John's ship fired the modified weapon, hitting the shields with the calculated frequency. For a split second, the barrier flickered and vanished. Seizing the opportunity, the Coalition launched boarding craft toward the station. Inside, they faced fierce resistance, but the element of surprise gave them the upper hand. John led his team through the corridors, taking down Zorathian soldiers with precision. Meanwhile, outside, Daniel continued to hold off enemy reinforcements, his movements fluid and fearless. The young pilot had transformed since joining the Coalition, finding strength in the memory of his sister. He weaved through the battlefield, his ship a blur of motion, buying precious time for the ground team. Back inside the station, John and his team reached the control room and planted explosives. As they retreated, the charges detonated, sending the mining station into chaos. The Coalition regrouped and withdrew, their mission a success. Though the victory was small, it proved that Sarah's discovery worked, and that humanity had a fighting chance. When they returned to Earth, the base erupted in cheers. For the first time in weeks, there was laughter amid the rubble. Rachel stood beside John, watching as people celebrated. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. And for the first time, John truly believed her. The success of the operation against the Zorathian mining station gave the Phoenix Coalition a much-needed boost. They had proven that Sarah's discovery could work in battle, and it fueled their determination to push forward. But Rachel knew they couldn't afford to rest. The Empire was still strong, and every victory brought them closer to retaliation. If they wanted to win this war, they needed to strike harder and deeper. Rachel called a meeting to discuss their next move. "We've hit supply depots and mining stations," she said, pacing in front of the group. "But if we want to cripple the Empire, we need to aim for something bigger, their central command hub." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The command hub was the heart of the Zorathian military operation in human territories, a fortress-like structure located deep within enemy space. Attacking it would be dangerous, nearly suicidal. But it was also the only way to deal a decisive blow. John spoke up first. "It's risky, but it's worth it," he said firmly. "If we take out the command hub, we can disrupt their entire chain of command. It'll give us a real chance to turn the tide." Others nodded in agreement, though some looked uneasy. Daniel Carter, who had grown quieter since Emily's death, clenched his fists but didn't say a word. He trusted Rachel and John, and he was ready to follow them wherever they led. The coalition spent the next several weeks preparing for the mission. They retrofitted more ships, trained harder, and refined their strategies. Sarah worked tirelessly to improve the energy frequency device, ensuring it would work flawlessly during the attack. Meanwhile, scouts gathered intelligence on the command hub, mapping its defenses and identifying potential weak points. Every detail mattered. One mistake could mean disaster. As the launch date approached, the group grew tense. This wasn't just another raid. It was a make-or-break moment. Rachel addressed the team one last time before departure. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Everything we fought for comes down to this. Some of us may not come back, but our sacrifice will mean something. We're fighting for everyone who suffered under the Empire's rule. For Emily, for Maria, for all of us." The fleet launched into the cold void of space, heading toward enemy territory. Along the way, they encountered survivors from other colonies, people who had fled the Empire's brutality. One woman, Maria Lopez, shared her story with the group. Her family had been killed during the Zorathian purge, leaving her alone and broken. Hearing her tale reminded the coalition why they were doing this. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As they neared the command hub, the tension aboard the ships was palpable. The structure loomed ahead, surrounded by layers of energy shields and swarms of patrol ships. Daniel took a deep breath as he prepared for his role in the assault. For Emily, he whispered to himself, gripping the controls tightly. When they entered enemy space, the fleet split into two groups. Daniel and the pilots engaged the patrol ships, drawing their attention away from the shields. Meanwhile, John and the ground team waited anxiously for Sarah's signal. "Shields are weakening," she called over the comms. "Fire now." The modified weapon struck true, causing the barrier to flicker and collapse. Seizing the moment, the coalition launched their boarding craft and headed straight for the command hub. Inside, the corridors were dark and eerily quiet. John led his team cautiously, knowing the enemy was waiting. As they moved deeper into the facility, they encountered resistance, but they pushed through, driven by the memory of all they had lost. Outside, Daniel continued to fight, keeping the enemy distracted. His movements were precise, his focus unshakable. Though the odds were against them, the coalition pressed forward, determined to reach the heart of the command hub. Each step brought them closer to victory and to justice. The battle inside the Zorathian command hub was fierce and unrelenting. John led his team through narrow corridors, exchanging fire with enemy soldiers at every turn. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burned metal. Bullets ricocheted off walls, and alarms blared loudly, drowning out all other sounds. Despite the chaos, John's mind remained sharp. He remembered Rachel's words before the mission. "Stick to the plan. Watch each other's backs." Those words echoed in his head as he signaled for his team to move forward. Sarah monitored their progress remotely, guiding them through the labyrinthine structure. "You're close," she said over the comms. "The main control room is just ahead, but there are heavy defenses around it." John nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He knew what was at stake. If they could disable the central control system, it would cripple the Empire's ability to coordinate attacks across human territories. But getting there wouldn't be easy. As they approached the control room, Daniel's voice crackled over the comms. "I can't hold them off much longer," he shouted. Outside, the young pilot was locked in a desperate dogfight, his ship weaving through enemy fire. The Coalition's fleet was outnumbered, and their ships were taking heavy damage. Still, Daniel fought on, determined to give the ground team the time they needed. His thoughts drifted to Emily, her calm face in his mind giving him strength. "I won't let you down," he whispered, pushing his ship to its limits. Back inside, John and his team reached the entrance to the control room. It was heavily guarded, with Zorathian soldiers positioned behind reinforced barriers. Rachel, who had joined the ground team for this critical phase, quickly devised a plan. "We'll split up," she said. "Half of us will draw their fire while the others flank them." Without hesitation, the team moved into position. Gunfire erupted as they launched their assault, catching the enemy off guard. John charged forward, firing his weapon with precision. He took down one soldier after another, his movements fueled by anger and determination. Rachel covered him, her aim steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Slowly but surely, they pushed the Zorathians back, clearing a path to the control room. When they finally breached the door, they found themselves face to face with rows of glowing consoles and holographic displays. This was the heart of the Empire's operations, a place where countless lives had been ruined by orders issued without mercy. "Plant the charges," John ordered. The team scattered, attaching explosives to key systems. As they worked, Sarah's voice came over the comms. "You've got 2 minutes before reinforcements arrive." The urgency in her tone spurred them to move faster. Just as they finished, the sound of boots echoed in the corridor outside. Reinforcements had arrived. "We need to go now," Rachel shouted. They sprinted toward the exit, dodging enemy fire as explosions began to rock the facility. The charges had been set to detonate in stages, ensuring maximum damage. Behind them, the control room collapsed in a fiery inferno, cutting off the Zorathians' ability to communicate with their forces. Outside, Daniel spotted the boarding craft emerging from the command hub. He pushed his ship harder than ever, drawing the enemy away from the evacuation point. His fighter took several hits, sparks flying from the console in front of him. Pain shot through his side as shrapnel grazed his arm, but he didn't stop. Finally, the last of the Coalition ships cleared the area. Knowing he couldn't escape, Daniel made a decision. With tears streaming down his face, he whispered, "For you, Emily," and rammed his ship into a nearby cruiser, creating a massive explosion that destroyed both vessels. Back aboard the fleet, John and Rachel watched in stunned silence as Daniel's sacrifice allowed them to escape. The weight of his loss hit them hard, but there was no time to grieve. The Coalition fled into the depths of space, leaving the crippled command hub behind. Though victorious, the cost had been high. As they regrouped, John clenched his fists, vowing to honor Daniel's memory by continuing the fight. The road ahead would be long, but the rebellion had struck a blow that the Empire would not soon forget. The Coalition fleet limped back to Earth, battered but alive. The destruction of the Zorathian command hub had been a monumental victory, but it came at a heavy price. Daniel Carter's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone. His bravery had ensured their escape, and his memory became a rallying cry for the group. John stood alone in the quiet corridors of the underground base, staring at a cracked screen showing footage of the burning command hub. He felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in what they had achieved, and sorrow for all they had lost. Rachel called a meeting to debrief the team. She looked exhausted, her usual confidence replaced by a somber determination. "We've dealt a major blow to the Empire," she began, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "But this war isn't over. General Vortak is still out there, and he'll do everything in his power to retaliate. We need to stay ready." Sarah Bennett sat quietly in the corner, her hands trembling as she replayed the data from the mission. She had spent hours analyzing the damage they had inflicted on the command hub, confirming that its central systems were completely destroyed. The Empire's ability to coordinate attacks across human territories had been severely crippled. But Sarah knew the Zorathians wouldn't stay disorganized for long. They would adapt, rebuild, and come back stronger. The Coalition couldn't afford to rest. As the days passed, the group began repairing their ships and tending to their wounded. Maria Lopez, the survivor they had met during their journey, offered to help. She worked alongside Sarah, learning how to maintain the modified weapons and repair damaged tech. Her presence brought a sense of hope to the base. Though she wasn't trained for combat, Maria's resilience inspired others to keep fighting. "You're doing this for people like me," she told Rachel one evening. "For those who can't fight back. Don't stop now." John spent most of his time training new recruits. Word of their victory had spread, drawing more volunteers to the cause. Farmers, engineers, teachers, all kinds of people came to join the rebellion. They brought with them stories of suffering under the Empire's rule, each tale fueling the Coalition's resolve. John listened to their stories, his heart heavy, but his spirit unbroken. He reminded them why they were fighting, not just for revenge, but for a future where humanity could live free. One night, Rachel approached John as he sat alone in the strategy room. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. John shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's hard," he admitted. "Every time we win, someone else pays the price. Daniel, Emily, how many more have to die before this ends?" Rachel sighed, sitting beside him. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but giving up isn't an option. We owe it to them to keep going." The next morning, the group gathered to honor Daniel's memory. They held a small ceremony in the ruins above the base, placing a makeshift marker among the rubble. John spoke briefly, his voice thick with emotion. "Daniel gave everything for us," he said. "He didn't hesitate when it mattered most. Let's make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." The others nodded, their faces solemn but resolute. As the ceremony ended, Rachel turned to the group. "We've struck a blow against the Empire, but our work isn't done. There's still General Vortak. He's the one pulling the strings, the one responsible for all of this. If we want to end this war, we need to take him down." The mention of Vortak reignited the fire in everyone. They knew confronting the general would be dangerous. He was ruthless, cunning, and protected by layers of security. But they also knew it was the only way to truly weaken the Empire. John clenched his fists, determination replacing doubt. "Then let's finish what we started," he said firmly. "For Daniel, for Emily, and for everyone who suffered under the Empire." Together, the Coalition began planning their next move. They were battered and scarred, but they were far from defeated. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face whatever came next. The Coalition's next target was clear: General Vortak, the ruthless commander behind the Empire's brutal campaigns against humanity. Intelligence gathered from survivors and intercepted communications revealed that Vortak was stationed at a heavily fortified outpost near the edge of Zorathian-controlled space. It was a dangerous mission, but the group knew they had no choice. Taking down Vortak was the only way to deal a decisive blow to the Empire. Preparations began immediately. The fleet was repaired and refitted with upgraded weapons based on Sarah's designs. Pilots practiced new combat maneuvers, while ground teams drilled tirelessly for close-quarters battles. John took charge of training the recruits, teaching them how to fight as a unit. "We're not just soldiers," he told them. "We're a family. We protect each other, no matter what." His words resonated deeply, especially among those who had lost loved ones to the Empire. Rachel devised a bold plan to infiltrate the outpost. Using Sarah's energy frequency device, they would disable the shields long enough to breach the facility. Once inside, two teams would split up, one to locate Vortak and the other to sabotage critical systems. It was risky, but it was their best chance. The group knew failure wasn't an option. They carried not only their own hopes, but also the memories of those they had lost along the way. On the day of the operation, the atmosphere aboard the ships was tense. Everyone understood the stakes. As they approached the outpost, Daniel's sacrifice weighed heavily on their minds. Maria Lopes stood beside Sarah in the control room, her hands trembling as she monitored the fleet's progress. "We can do this," Sarah reassured her, though her own voice betrayed hints of doubt. When they reached the outpost, the fleet engaged the enemy patrols, drawing their attention away from the shields. John led the boarding team, his heart pounding as they launched toward the structure. The modified weapon fired, hitting the shields with the precise frequency needed to weaken them. For a brief moment, the barrier flickered and collapsed, allowing the coalition to slip inside. The interior of the outpost was eerily quiet, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the metallic walls. John signaled for the teams to split up, reminding them to stay alert. He and Rachel headed deeper into the facility, following intel that placed Vortak in the central command chamber. Along the way, they encountered enslaved alien workers, species subjugated by the Zorathians and forced to serve them. Some looked up in fear, while others whispered words of gratitude as the rebels passed. John hesitated, torn between his mission and the urge to free the captives. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll come back for them," she promised. "But right now, we need to focus." Finally, they reached the command chamber. Inside, General Vortak stood surrounded by guards, his cold eyes narrowing as he saw the intruders. "You humans are persistent," he sneered, "but you're nothing compared to us." Without waiting for a response, he ordered his men to attack. A fierce firefight erupted, with John and Rachel taking cover behind consoles. Bullets flew as they returned fire, slowly thinning out the guards. When the last guard fell, John confronted Vortak directly. The general fought back with surprising skill, wielding a blade with deadly precision. John dodged and countered, his movements fueled by years of pain and anger. "This is for Emily," he growled, striking a decisive blow. Vortak staggered, disbelief flashing across his face before he collapsed. As alarms blared, signaling the destruction of key systems, John and Rachel regrouped with the others. Together, they fled the outpost, narrowly escaping as explosions tore through the structure. Back aboard the fleet, cheers erupted, but they were bittersweet. The victory came at a cost, and the scars of battle ran deep. Yet, as they looked toward the stars, they knew one thing for certain: humanity had taken a step closer to freedom. The destruction of General Vortak's outpost marked a turning point in the war against the Zorathian Empire. News of his death spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the Empire's ranks. Without their ruthless commander to enforce order, the Zorathians began to falter. Colonies that had long lived under oppression started to rise up, inspired by the coalition's victories. The rebellion grew stronger with each passing day, fueled by hope and the belief that freedom was within reach. Back on Earth, the Phoenix Coalition worked tirelessly to rebuild. The underground base buzzed with activity as new recruits arrived daily, eager to join the fight. Farmers turned soldiers trained alongside engineers who now built weapons. Teachers taught children hidden in the ruins, ensuring the next generation would know the value of freedom. John walked among them, offering guidance and encouragement. He no longer felt the weight of loss as heavily. Instead, he carried the memories of Emily and Daniel as a source of strength. Rachel addressed the group one evening, her voice filled with quiet pride. "We've come so far," she said, standing before a crowd of weary but determined faces. "But this isn't just about defeating the Zorathians. It's about building something better, a future where no one has to live in fear." Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone why they had sacrificed so much. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time, it felt possible. Sarah Bennett continued to innovate, using captured Zorathian tech to improve their weapons and defenses. She also worked on ways to free enslaved alien species, believing humanity had a responsibility to help others suffering under the Empire's rule. Maria Lopes stayed by her side, learning everything she could. Together, they developed plans to liberate labor camps across the galaxy, vowing to leave no one behind. As weeks turned into months, the Coalition launched coordinated attacks on remaining Zorathian strongholds. Each victory brought them closer to total liberation. Enemy forces grew desperate, their once unshakable confidence crumbling. Survivors from liberated colonies joined the rebellion, swelling their numbers and strengthening their resolve. Humanity stood united, fighting not just for themselves, but for every oppressed being in the galaxy. John often found himself reflecting on how much had changed since he left Mars. What began as a personal quest for vengeance had transformed into something greater, a movement driven by courage, sacrifice, and hope. He visited the marker honoring Daniel whenever he needed clarity, finding solace in the knowledge that his friend's death had not been in vain. One evening, Rachel approached him as he stood gazing at the stars. "What happens after this?" she asked softly. John smiled faintly. "We rebuild," he replied. "Not just our homes, but our lives. We make sure no one ever has to go through what we did." When the final battle came, it was swift and decisive. The coalition struck at the Empire's core, dismantling its last stronghold. As the dust settled, survivors emerged from hiding, stepping into a world forever changed. The Zorathian Empire had fallen, its reign of terror ended by those who refused to surrender. In the aftermath, humanity faced the daunting task of rebuilding. Cities were reconstructed, families reunited, and dreams rekindled. John returned to Mars, planting crops in soil that had lain dormant for years. For him, it symbolized renewal, a promise that life could flourish again. Across the galaxy, others did the same, rising from the ashes of conflict to create a brighter future. And so, amidst the scars of war, a new chapter began. It was a testament to resilience, unity, and the unyielding human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could prevail.